good evening and welcome to our Tri-Board meeting. This is December 13th, 2021. I'd like to welcome the school committee and the FinCom for coming and joining us today while we go over the financial forecast in our capital improvement plan. I would like to take our board out of recess. I'll take a motion for that.
I move that we come out of recess. And I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I would ask the chair of the school committee, Andrew McDevitt, open his meeting.
So I'll call to order a meeting of the North Andover School Committee, December 13th, 2021. And we'll do a quick roll call vote because we have one member who is remote. So Ms. Picard?
Yes.
Okay, can you just fix the audio on that?
Do you
Okay.
need a motion, or do you just need acknowledgement that we're present?
So moved.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Vitsky. Ms. Picard?
Yes.
Ms. Petrowski?
Yes.
Ms. Vitsky?
Yes.
Ms. Mably?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes. We are in session.
Thank you. And I will ask the chair of the FinCom, Donovan O'Connell, to open his meeting as well.
Yeah, I would like to call to order the finance committee of the town of North Andover at 7:07, December 13th, 2021. I see that we have a quorum in person and Dustin Silk is online, so we're good to go.
Excellent. And I will ask our town manager, Melissa Rodriguez, to start us off with the financial forecast
I
presentation.
will, thank you. And if you have trouble hearing me, please let me know. This is my second most exciting day at work. The first one's town meeting. I was like, oh, it's the day. And this is the second most exciting day. So this says a lot about my life, but here we are. This is the second year in a row that we've done this tri-board meeting. It's probably most helpful for me and my team because we're able to really get everybody, build consensus, have everybody have a clear understanding of what we're doing going into the budget season, and we're able to do the capital improvement plan as well so people understand what the priorities are. This year is particularly exciting because we have some really interesting news in the financial forecast and we have some really exciting projects in the capital plan. So we'll get started. I did hand out to the people in the audience or who are in the meeting copies of the presentation because I do know that when you're not looking at it directly on the computer like our remote people are, it's harder to see the slides. So first, we just want to talk a little bit about what our financial condition is. We continue to maintain the AAA bond rating, and that rating really reflects our strong economy, our strong financial management, and our strong budgetary performances. The town has again received the Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting for 2020, and again received the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Award for 2020, and I believe that's the 10th year in a row we received that, so kudos to our finance director. Not every community does that.
That's my fault.
No worries. Not me.
Sorry. I said nothing on there. I turned everything down. I apologize.
You're good. All right, so our financial condition, just to continue on with our reserves, really the two that are kind of most important in my head today are the Stabilization Fund, which is really our rainy day account, as well as our free cash number. The other stabilization account we have is our capital stabilization account. We've been slowly building that up in anticipation of Facilities Master Plan 2. We also have a special education stabilization account, which we have not used the last few years because we've really been trying to fund as many of our operating expenses through the operating budget. But we are continuing to have that in case we ever do have a special education emergency, which does happen. And we have our OPEB trust currently funded at $5.9 million. So, for the people at home, I know all of you know this, but we do a financial forecast because it's really a useful tool for us when we're moving forward with our budget. It allows us to make policy decisions. It allows us to evaluate what may happen in the future. But it's also a really good warning system. So when we look at the financial forecast, it often can help us detect when we're going to have problems in future years, right? So, this year looks great, but year 4 doesn't look good. And when we're negotiating contracts, whether they be collective bargaining agreements or contracts for services, we can keep that in mind. And that's a really important tool for us. It does not in any way, shape, or form insulate us from potential surprises. The financial forecast 5 years ago certainly did not think we'd be facing COVID right now and looking at some of the issues we had in the past year, but it allows us to at least plan for and consider potential issues that we can know about. So when we do that, we usually use educated estimates, and we do that based on our past expenditures and our past revenues using the expertise of our staff. Here in town, we do have our Revenue and Fixed Cost Committee who helps us with that. a financial forecast really is most effective when it encompasses a short period of time. We can tell you if we look forward 20 years, we're not going to be able to give you a good idea of what our expenditures or our revenues are going to look like. And so we try to keep it 3 to 5 years. It's not a detailed like a budget. It's a summary of where we're going, and it's always conservative. But it is a good practice, and our bond rating agencies look at the fact that we do this very favorably. So North Andover has 4 major categories of revenue. We have our real estate and personal property taxes, our intergovernmental aid, our local receipts, and then miscellaneous revenue. When we begin our budget process every year, we review those revenues from the past years, looking for trends and anomalies, which was more difficult in the last 2 years than it has been in years past. Our real estate property taxes account for 79% of all revenues received annually, and the residential makes up about 85% of that. So really, a lot of our budget does fall on our residential taxpayer. It's by far the largest portion of our revenue. The tax levy is the amount a community can raise through property tax. It can be any amount up to the levy limit. It raises 2.5% annually, as you all know, and it can raise more through 3 different mechanisms: a debt or capital exclusion, an override, or new growth. And new growth is what we're really going to be talking about tonight. This is up about 1% from last year. For fiscal year 23, we anticipate new growth of $6 million. We have kind of a perfect storm. We have a bunch of projects who were delayed due to COVID. Now they're suddenly coming on. And we have Amazon coming on in a portion and their TIF not yet in effect. This is much higher than we typically see or forecast. So when we create our budget, we typically forecast between $650,000 to $750,000 depending on the year. This little chart right here shows you what we actually got in free cash, what we certified over the last 5 or 6 year period, and you can see it ranged from $570,000 to $1.3 million, nowhere near the number of $6 million, right? So this is extraordinary, and I made my notes and I wrote extraordinary, and then I put an exclamation mark after it. And any of you that know me know that I never use exclamation marks, right? So I was like, this is truly happening. And so we have a lot of different things coming on. We have some things that are coming on and kind of straddling both 23 and 24, which is interesting. Avalon, Signature Commons, Minko, the storage facility for across from Amazon, Crosspoint, Bacon Joy, and finally Amazon. So the town has accepted a local option for accelerated new growth. And what that means is that we value and assess our new growth occurring by June 30th for the fiscal year beginning on July 1st, even if that construction is not completed. For many of those projects, we are capturing some in 23 and some in 24. Not all communities do this. This is a local option that the town went ahead and accepted many years ago. A lot of other communities would wait until the project came on at 100% and then just capture it during that fiscal year. But what that means, and what some communities feel, is that you're being cheated out of some amount of taxes for things that have already been built and were not yet captured. We anticipate that Amazon will be at 75% completion on June 30th. And the way the TIF is drafted, the TIF does not go into effect until they receive their certificate of occupancy at 100% completion. This is very complicated. And I'm happy to answer any questions in this meeting, offline, for anybody. But in essence, what this means is that we'll have new growth in fiscal year 23 for the Amazon project of approximately $3.5 million. So of that $6 million number, Amazon makes up 3.5, and the rest of those projects make up the other 2.4, okay? And I will say, the assessor will probably kick me, but this is a very conservative number, right? It's very hard for us this early in the process to figure out what that new growth number is going to be. We had a call with DOR, and they said, well, why don't you just go to your fall town meeting and amend your budget? And we said, fall town meeting? We don't have one. So we have to have good estimates, and so we do our best to get there. In FY24, the remaining 25% will come on, so that's just 75% of the project, as well as the personal property taxes. In the personal property taxes, if you remember, we were very careful when we drafted the TIF not to include those. So that's an additional $1.9 million just on that. However, in fiscal year 24, the TIF will come on for the new construction, and that means that 80% of the real estate tax new growth for Amazon will be exempted in that year. Remember, if you remember correctly, the way the TIF was done, the first 2 years we exempted 80%, the next 2 years 60, the next 2 years 40, and then 20, and then they came on and paid everything in the 10th year. Okay, so what will happen is that we'll see a large amount of new growth in new value come on in the industrial tax base in fiscal year 23. And then in fiscal year 24, when the TIF goes into effect, 80% of that will go away, and it has to go somewhere else, right? So I kept thinking of it as like a balloon, and you have a fully inflated balloon, 100%, and that's our industrial tax base, and outside of the balloon is all of our residents and our commercials, and then we slowly let out 80% of that air, right? That air is going into the rest of the room. So what will happen in fiscal year 23 is that residents will get a $500 about reduction on their taxes. And if we continue to raise in fiscal year 24 everything from Amazon, the average resident would get about a $1,200 increase in their taxes. So we need to be very careful in how we spend this new growth. The problem is, if we don't capture it, right, in this year, we can't say in 5 years, hey, remember in fiscal year 23, we had that $3.5 million, we could use that now, right? So the idea that we have, basically, is to figure out how to offset the burden to the taxpayer. And there's many ways to do that. One would be, in what our plan is for this year, and you'll see this a little bit in our financial forecast, in our budget, capital budget, would be to have some one-time expenditures that we would use, right? So we perhaps, what we're going to say is, let's pay for the design of the middle school using those funds, right? That's a one-time ask. And then in fiscal year 24, we can make a decision. Maybe we don't go all the way up to the top of new growth in fiscal year 24. Maybe we make a policy decision that would have us have like a slower increase, right? So we capture 80%, so instead of 80%, 60%. We do it slow, right? And so it builds back up slowly for taxpayers. Maybe we look at something like the residential exemption and see what that would do for residents if we were maybe moving that burden a little bit. There's a lot of options, and we as a community can come together and decide how we want to do that. Maybe as a community we say, you know what, we've got a lot of expenses coming up. We want to continue to raise that money. But this will give us all of those options. I also want to be really transparent with all of you that this is an issue, right? It's an exciting issue. It's amazing. But it's also something we really want to keep an eye on because we don't want to surprise taxpayers. We don't want to overly burden the residents. So it's exciting that we have, right? It's all kind of coming together in one kind of amazing spiral, but we have needs that we can fund these important projects and move forward using these one-time revenues and then make the decision next year on how we want to move forward for fiscal year 24. The second part of our revenue is intergovernmental. And so that's about 10% of the revenues we receive annually. And that's things like Chapter 70, our unrestricted general government aid, veterans benefits. This can vary from year to year. The veterans benefits, we get reimbursed about 75%. This year, the cherry sheet has Chapter 70 at about $9.3 million, all general government at $2.8 million, and then our assessments, what we pay back to the state, at about $642,000. The third bucket is local receipts. That accounts for about 9% of all the revenues received annually. In reviewing the most recent revenue forecasting that we've had come in where we are, it looks like that's actually leveling off. If you remember correctly, last year that we saw a decrease there, and we were all really concerned. But I noticed in Lynn's newest numbers that meals tax looks like it's back on track. And so, we're starting to see that kind of come to fruition, which is good. And then finally, we have our operating transfers and other revenue. That accounts for about 1.6% of our income. That's actual revenue received, and really what that is our indirect costs from the enterprise funds. We're seeing about a 2.5% increase in those. And remember that the Stevens estate last year, in fiscal year 22, was no longer included in those because we no longer have indirect costs for them. So this is just a breakdown. Like I told you before, 79% is really coming from our taxpayer. And, there's not unusual for a town like ours that doesn't have a large commercial and industrial base to see that. These are our revenue projections for fiscal year 23 through 27. I will say the 25 through 27 is very conservative. We're using that $700,000 new growth number. We're not accounting, I think, yet for the TIF increase because we don't know what our plan is for the new growth. So we wanted to be very clear, but that's something that we want to be watching. So these are very conservative numbers. The next thing that we do is we forecast our potential expenses. And so the expenses are basically everything that's in the budget. Education, general government, our public safety, human services. And what we really think about is what our budget drivers are. What are our fixed costs? What do we know, right? We have contracts for all of our printers. We know exactly what our printers are going to cost us every year. We can easily put that in the budget. We have collective bargaining agreements that are already done, right? So we can easily insert those into the budget. But things like insurance, we have to estimate, right? We don't know, is our health insurance going to go up by 4%? Is it going to go up by 6%? But we had a lot of claims, so our liability insurance going to go up. And so we try our best to really try to figure out what we need to put into this. And then the other thing we think about, has there been any changes in state and federal mandates? Have we had any bylaw changes that might cause an increase in need in services? Have our demographics changed, our population changed? We work really hard to try to keep everything stable as much as we can so that our budget increases are really conservative. But those are things that we look at when we're going through this process. This is our expenditure forecast. I'm going to hide this because you can't see my bottom numbers here, but okay. So you can see that in fiscal year 23, we're showing a surplus. I'm going to explain to you why later. But right now we are showing that our expenditures will have a surplus of 2.8 million. In fiscal year 24, you're seeing a surplus of about 793,000. And then don't panic when you look at fiscal year 25 through 27. My first year here, I panicked. But that's how we do it. We're very, very conservative in how we forecast these out. We'll see things like new growth, we'll see things come on, new revenue sources, and we'll start to see those offset. And so when you see that $8 million in fiscal year 27, don't fall out of your chair. It does reflect about a 5% increase in fiscal year 23 for expenses. We have our no contractual increases, which we have in here as well. It shows about a 10% increase for other personal benefits, 6% increase to the GIC. This is a chart. Yeah, absolutely.
Debt service, so between 25 and 26, where does that big jump come in?
Yep, so that's us implementing Facilities Master Plan 2. And so it was very difficult to decide what was going to go first tonight, whether I should present the capital or the forecast first. We had like a lot of conversations about it because they're so linked to each other. But I knew that if I didn't explain the $6 million first, it would be very confusing when I was trying to show everybody how we were funding things. So that's what you're seeing there. This is a chart of our retirement appropriation. So you can see that we do see increases through the years. Remember that back in the early 2000s, or maybe even the late 90s, there was an effort from the state that required us to fund our retirement appropriation at 100%. It was kind of like OPEB at the time. It was the old school OPEB. And so we have never extended our payment plan, which a lot of communities have. And in fiscal year 36, this additional payment essentially goes away, which is very exciting, right? So that's, something that we can keep an eye on moving forward as a community. One of the things that we've discussed internally is, do you automatically shove that over to OPEB, right? Do you say, all right, we are freeing up all this money, this would be a great thing to put towards OPEB. And there's so many options, but just something to keep an eye on as we move forward. And then this is just a breakdown of the budget generally. So as you can see, the schools make up about 50% of our budget. That doesn't include their benefits or the shared services that we have, which we do a good job of sharing a lot of different things. General government's at about 5%, public safety at about 11%. Our benefits, between the group health and our other personal benefits really are at about 18% of our budget, and that's staying in the GIC. So, it would be much higher, I think, if we had not made that decision all those years ago. And that's the financial forecast. I'm happy to answer any questions. If the chairs want me to move forward with the capital, thinking that might answer some of the questions, and then we could do both, it's completely up to you.
Yeah, we're good with that.
Yeah, I would recommend we see the whole. And then proceed with questions.
All right, sounds good. Okay, so this is this year's capital improvement plan. I'm going to run through the basics again. What is a capital improvement plan for people who don't know at home? It identifies our capital items. It's usually a tangible asset. It has to be something you can hold on to that costs more than $25,000 and that has a minimal useful lifespan of at least 5 years. Provides a planning schedule, and it defines what our financial options will be. As a policy, the town does try to fund projects of less than $50,000 within the operating budget, so you don't tend to see too many of the smaller projects within this plan. And then separately, we have the capital budget, which is the upcoming year's spending plan for the capital items, and that goes to town meeting for approval. So in this one, we do basically is we ask all of the department heads in the schools to submit and prioritize their own requests. Lynn and I evaluate them, and then we have a group meeting to discuss the requests, concerns, and funding mechanisms. That's really helpful, actually. because we get to hear each other's concerns, and sometimes we'll realize that two people are having the exact same issue, and it makes more sense for them to join together. There was a conversation at the last meeting about streets, and, the police department wanted to be wrapped in on something that was happening with one of the street projects, and so it just creates a really good dialogue between all of the groups. We have 45 projects in a 5-year period, totaling over $110 million. Total for fiscal year 23 is $10.4 million, $10.5 million, and that's 25 projects. Of the 45 projects, one of the things you'll notice is that a lot of those are multi-year projects, right? So you see them every year. It's because they're routine maintenance, and it's important that we're doing that, right? So those are things that, you might just see one roof project or one HVAC project that will pop up, but you'll see us constantly doing drainage, constantly doing culverts, always doing sidewalks, because those are things that we need to constantly be maintaining. So this is this year's plan. And I'm not going to get too much into the individual projects. If you do have questions about those, I'm happy to try to answer them. I'm also happy to ask any of our department heads to come up and talk to any of them, and I know they would love to because they're all very passionate about their projects. But like I said, we do have a lot of routine items, and the ones you're seeing in the fiscal year 23 plan is our IT upgrades. For instance, we get new laptops, new monitors, the $50,000 a year that we do for playground maintenance. We've got some HVAC projects. We've got a culvert inspection project in here. We're renovating the library bathrooms. If any of you have been in library bathrooms, you know that they need to be renovated. And we're continuing with the school drainage program. And then we have some new things. So we have the Fields Master Plan. That was one of the select board's goals for this year. So that will look at all of our fields, including the fields at the schools, look at usage of them, and come up with both a maintenance plan, as well as letting us know if there's anything that we're missing, if there's fields that we should be looking at building. We do have an ambulance in this plan. We have security upgrades at the schools, and a generator for the senior center. So there's just some of the kind of newer things that have popped up. This is the 5 years, so you can see that we do plan the whole 5 years out. On the chart, you can see that we have the borrowing, if we were going to borrow, what we would borrow them at. So the length of time for a bond is set by statute, and it's based on the years of usage. So typically, if you're doing a building, you could bond for 25 years, but if you're doing, for instance, a vehicle, it's more of a 10-year period. And so we have that led out as well. And as part of this, we realized that we really have to introduce Facilities Master Plan 2 and how we're going to be phasing that and funding that. So I know that the Finance Committee, the School Committee, and the Select Board have all had conversations about Facilities Master Plan 2. I know I've had one with the Finance Committee. I know that Mr. Maley and Superintendent Gilligan have been in front of the School Committee, obviously, as well as the Select Board. But for those who have not yet learned about it, we are entering our final phase with the start of the construction of the Senior Center. And you can see here Senator Tarr throwing dirt at us in excitement because we were so happy to be kicking that off. And while we've been doing that, we've been finalizing Facilities Master Plan 2. So Facilities Master Plan 2 addresses the ABECC, the Atkinson Fire Station 2, the Franklin, the Kittredge, the North Andover Middle School, and the North Andover Youth Center. The more information on all of these projects, probably more than anybody wants, is available both on the town website. We have a website now set up for Facilities Master Plan 2. There's a link right at the top of the school's website. I believe it's on Superintendent Gilligan's Twitter. But there will be a final report coming out soon as well. It's going to include all of the needs assessments, what the next steps are going to be, the funding plan, and we'll be presenting that to the entire community when that comes out. But today we're going to recommend an order of projects. So why this order? And we'll start with the order, and then I'll explain what our thought process is. So the start would be the middle school. We would do design of that in fiscal year 23 and construction of that in fiscal year 24. The Kittredge, we would design in 23 and construction in 25. The fire station, we would design in 25 and construction in 26. The Franklin Gymnasium, we would construct in 26. The Atkinson School, we would design in 26 and do construction in 28. The Youth Center, we would design in 27 and do construction in 28. The Franklin School, we would design in 33 and construction in 35. In the ABECC, we design in 35 and construction in 36. Now, I will say, I know fiscal year 36 feels like 1 million years away. It does to me, too. You know, this is based on what we can afford today. If we have new projects come on, for instance, we get another large facility, Royal Crest, any of those that comes in with new revenue, new tax sources, we can look at this and readjust. But I'll explain how we got to this based on what we have available. But a little bit on the why of this recommended order. So it addresses the middle school first. And for me, as long as I've been here, the middle school has kind of been the resounding issue. And so it addresses that first. It reflects the possibility of MSBA funding for Kittredge, right? We won't know whether or not that's going to be available to us until March. We do anticipate putting a warrant article on regardless. I've got my fingers and toes crossed, and I feel good about it. But even if MSBA doesn't move forward, that's our most expensive project. And so it makes sense, due to inflation, to do that further up in the process. The order allows us to use our decreasing debt to our advantage by matching our project costs to our increased capacity. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. But basically, as we have debt falling off, we're matching that debt with the value of these new projects. And so we're reducing the impact of taxpayers as much as possible and reducing the need for debt exclusions as much as possible. And I'll talk more about that as we go through the process. And I know this is complicated. Projected cost of this entire plan, and this is one of the reasons why it has to be spread out. If we did it today, we were like, oh, you know what, we're going to break ground on all of these projects right now. It would be impossible, but it would cost us $139 million, okay? If we use this recommended order over a period of 15 years, and we account for inflation, the projects will cost $166.9 million. And that's all in, that's everything. And we'll talk a little bit more about what's included, right? What's included in the production cost? It's design, construction administration, technology and fixtures, the future operating costs, so the lights, the electricity, the operating budget that increases due to the building size. Do we need more staff? If we're going to put 15 more classrooms at the middle school, we're not going to not budget for the teachers. That doesn't make sense, right? So let's do that now. But if we're going to budget for the teachers, we also need to budget for their benefits, their OPEB costs, their Medicare, and their other employee expenses. This is all in. The design of these buildings would cost $11.9 million. The total construction is $151 million. The total operating is $3.6. And the plan accounts for 3% operating inflation per year and 5% construction cost inflation per year of the plan. Okay, so if you remember correctly, you know, and you look back, and we had to come back to town meeting a couple of times for the senior center, right? Because we went out to bid, we didn't have enough money. We don't want to do that again, right? We want to have look forward and at the end of the day say, guess what? We came in under budget because we accounted for inflation. So why is this plan different from Facilities Master Plan 1? And that's one of the things that people have asked me. You know, well, Facilities Master Plan 1, we were able to do construction one year, design one year, construction the next year, and it just went really quickly. So part of that's not entirely true, right? Facilities Master Plan 1 originated in 2012. 9 years later, and I just told you we're just starting construction on the senior center, right? So it hasn't really been that quickly. But additionally, Facilities Master Plan 1 was originally valued at only $24 million. This is almost 6 times that. Right? So, yeah, we can't do it as fast if we're going to get it done. And I think that this is a more realistic plan. It's also an all-in plan. It's all-in approach. We're going to look at everything. We know what the costs are for everything, and we're going to bring it forward as one full project. So how are we funding it? For the design, the plan for the middle school is an appropriation from the operating budget. And the Kittredge design is also an appropriation from the operating budget as well as a little bit of free cash. Why is that important, right? Let's all think back. We get that $3.5 million from Amazon. We don't want to put it all towards new operating costs because in fiscal year 24, that whole burden is going to flip over to the taxpayer. Let's use it now to do the design. We don't want to lose it. Let's use it to do the design of these 2 buildings, and then we can make a really educated decision in fiscal year 24 and how we want to use that moving forward. For future years of design, we've got a combination of debt capacity, free cash, and the capital stabilization account funding all of those designs. One thing we've been doing as we've moved forward, and some of you remember me talking about this last year's budget and the year before that, is as debt capacity has been falling off, as projects have been falling off of our books, we've been saving that money, right? So we know that we had $400,000 fall off 2 years ago, $600,000 in payments fall off last year, and instead of letting that kind of get pulled into the operating budget, we now have $1 million to put towards a debt payment, and that's a lot, right? But there are years we're doing that, right? Because we know we've got, over the next 15 years, $72 million of capacity falling off. But some years we have to cobble those together in order to pay for our projects. Those years when we're saving that capacity, we can use that to do the designs. So it works out pretty well. How are we going to pay for the construction? So for fiscal year 24, for the middle school, we'll actually have capacity within the levy. We have saved about $17 million in capacity over the last 2 years. we will be able to pay for that through the levy. So I think that's pretty amazing. We won't need a debt exclusion. We won't need an election. It'll be a vote at town meeting. For fiscal year 25, there's two different scenarios. And they both are with the 60-40 split because based on kind of the conversations we've had so far, our past knowledge MSBA, that's what we think will end up. So if we do get MSBA, we will have capacity within the levy, plus using a little bit of the Amazon new growth in fiscal year 25 to pay for Kittredge. If we do not get MSBA, then it would be a combination of capacity within the levy and a debt exclusion. Fingers crossed MSBA, because I think that if they see us, I think if the town sees us really investing and having success with this plan, that it will build momentum of excitement around it, right? And so, you know, I felt really good about the MSBA meeting. I think they really saw the need. I know that the chair was there, Superintendent Gilligan was there. Either way, we're ready to move forward, and we have a plan for either scenarios, but it would be great to be able to do it within the levy. Fiscal year 26, again, we've got projects falling off. We can do the fire station within the levy. For the Franklin Auditorium, we could use debt capacity we have reserved. That's one of the years where we're saving a little bit of money, and we would use that debt capacity to build that auditorium. Fiscal year 28, for Atkinson and the Youth Center, we would have $7.4 million in the levy, and that would be our first operational override. So we would, our first debt exclusion, and that would be $23.9 million excluded, and we'd have to do that as an override. For fiscal year 35, Franklin, $19 million of it would be in the levy. So interestingly, as you're coming from fiscal year 29 to fiscal year 34, projects are falling off, but it's small stuff. It's like, you know, $1 million in a project here, $1 million in a project there. We got to cobble that together for 7 years to get to Franklin. So $19 million in the levy, $18 million could either be post-TIF Amazon new growth, because by that point we're at that 10-year mark, or debt exclusion. I've calculated it both ways. And then fiscal year 36, the ABECC would be able to be within the levy. So how are we doing this with so few debt exclusions, right? So anyone who doesn't know, a debt exclusion is basically a temporary increase to the levy to pay for debt for a specific purpose. So when you do a debt exclusion, it's very clear in the warrant. We are raising $3 million for a period of 25 years to pay for this. And at the end of that 25-year period, that override goes away. So you can't say, ooh, it's falling off, we're going to use it for this. It doesn't work that way. It's just gone, right? So there's two ways that basically we're making this work here. Over the past few years, like I told you, knowing we had these big projects, we used the cash on hand to pay for capital items, we opened up capacity in the budget, and we saved. And then again, we're taking advantage of our decreasing debt. So we know we have $72 million over a 25-year period. This has a great advantage of keeping our debt payment fairly level, right? And then we're avoiding that large impact on taxpayers. You know, it's hard for people to get on board with a huge increase. In all of the operating costs, that whole $3.6 million of operating costs will all be through new growth. We've calculated how we'd be able to do that. In essence, what we've created, not is we have both the capital stabilization account, but we've created almost like a debt payment savings account within our budget. So what's the impact, right? What's the change? So I calculated this two ways. If we get the MSBA funding, and this assumes 3% as an interest rate for 25-year bonds, and it takes into account, and me and Stan have talked about this, it takes into account that we do have some debt exclusions coming off in 25 and 26. If at the MSBA funding, it would cause the average single-family taxpayer $5,915 over a period of 30 years. Fiscal year 28 to 34, they'd pay about $158. Fiscal year 35 to 52, they'd pay $274. And fiscal year 54 to 57, they'd pay $116. I had to go back and check twice because I was like, 57? That's not possible, but it is. Without the MSBA funding, so if we don't get the MSBA funding, it's $12,363 over a period of 33 years, because we would not have taken any debt exclusion for Kittredge, right? So the debt exclusions are what's causing that taxpayer impact to increase. So if we did not get MSBA funding, fiscal year 25 to 27 is $248. Fiscal year 28 to 34 is $406. Fiscal year 35 to fiscal year 50 is $522. Fiscal year 51 to fiscal year 53 is $274. And fiscal year 54 to 57 is $116. Now I have to caution you, this is in a vacuum. Everything we're doing here is in a vacuum, right? Like, we're making capital plans. They're all subject to change. All of this could change. It's going to really require the town to have incredible discipline to keep with this 15-year plan. we're committed to that, but we have to do it as a group. But these numbers that I'm showing you right now, these tax payments, these are in a vacuum. These are looking at your current single-family home in this fiscal year, and what it would cost today, right? So as rates change, as values change, these numbers could change, but it's the best way that I can calculate it for you.
Melissa, may I ask, you got a little bit of time to maybe Lynn can put this together for us, but I was just trying to put the 158 or 248 in perspective. What's been the average increase, we'll say over the last 5 years, the last 10 years, of the residential tax, whatever's being carried by the residential taxpayer?
We can do that.
So that makes sense? In other words, I want to see how much just by the year over year in, year out, what's happening, projecting that ahead based upon the trend, and just compare that to what this is.
So you'd like to see what the average single-payer tax bill has been per year, has been per year for the last 5 years?
Yep.
So
And
we
then-
know this year, the average bill is going up $255.
Just trying to put this all in perspective, and the amount, and obviously translating that into percentage too. So again, yes, this is in a vacuum, but I think it's also valuable to
It is, yeah,
box it like that.
absolutely.
Appreciate it.
Incremental to the normal.
Madam Town Manager?
Yes?
On the same token, just to clarify, when we're looking at MSBA funding over the 30 years, that is within Prop 2.5. That does not require an operational override.
Nope, some of them do require an operational override and some of them do not. So just moving back a little bit, we would have to do an operation, if we did not get, obviously we
No,
did.
that's why I was referring to the column on the left, which included the 50-40 split. When we're looking at 559-15 over 30 years, that was the one that did not require an operational override? Is
For
that correct?
Kittredge, correct, for Kittredge, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Town Manager, so
You mentioned based on rates and things today, so are you doing the extremely low rates today? Is that what you're using in your, I'm talking about interest rates. in
Yeah,
your- in
we're using the 3% number, and it's so interesting. So when we have these conversations, one of us three of us will be in the room, and one person will say we should use 2%, and someone else will say we should use 3.5. So we haven't taken debt in a while. It has been since the senior center. We've only had one rating meeting since I've been here. But, I think I'm using 3%, and I think that's conservative.
What did you use? I'm
I
sorry.
used 3%.
You think that's conservative?
I think that's conservative, based on our rate, yeah.
And how many years are you going out with that?
I am using 25 years. In the past, we have done some projects that are
Go back 25 years and see what the rates were?
we could.
To do an average of that, it seems, maybe I'm wrong, and I'd love to be wrong. Seems a little low.
And so the projects that I recently did in Sudbury, we were also a AAA community. That was 3% as well. I'm looking at Lynn and Bill, and they're nodding along. They think 3% is probably accurate. Yeah. We did send over our facilities master plan to the company that we use for our debt rating. So he'll take a look at it and tell us if he thinks that we're crazy or not. But I think that's probably a good number. So, which is good.
Thank you.
Okay. So what's next, right? We have the final report coming in. The final report's going to document all the projects. It's going to document all the needs. It's going to document this funding plan. Town meeting 2022 is really going to kick us off with those first two appropriations. I want to remind people, every project we do is going to need several approvals, right? It's not like we're just going to go to a town meeting in 2022 and say, hey, here we are with our plan. Everyone's going to be excited and that's it, right? That's what I mean about the kind of sticking to the plan and being deliberate. We're going to have to get approvals for the construction. We're going to have to get approvals for the design. We'll have to do that all individually. And I just want to remind people that any action we take at the 22 town meeting is actually not going to cause any burden to any of the taxpayers in fiscal year 23, because it's all going to be Amazon New Growth that we're using to fund those first two capital designs, which is great. So back to the regular capital. What we're going to do for our funding plan for fiscal year 23 is not so different from what we've done in the past. We are advising not to take debt again, because again, we're saving it. We have $12.9 million in free cash. We are recommending using 6.7 of that to fund the capital plan. Again, we're recommending $2.8 million to be out of the operating budget, and that is for the design of the middle school and the design of Kittredge. We have Chapter 90 for $820,000. And Chapter 90, for those of you that don't know, that's the money we get from the state to do street work, and it has to be regional roads. So why not debt, right? This came up last year. Everyone was like, the debt, our rates are so good. Why aren't we taking debt? So we have a policy of keeping debt at or below 5% of the total operating budget, right? With this plan, the debt percentage is going to be at 3.52% for next year. In fiscal year 23, we have $408,000 falling off, freeing that up with the $600,000 we had before. And as we move forward, we are going to see that debt percentage increasing, right? And so you can see if you look here, if we follow this plan by fiscal year 27, we're really looking at getting closer to that 6% mark. And so that's something we need to think about as a community. Do we want to amend our financial policies? Are we comfortable with the 6% number? I certainly am. I think that, we're doing this in a really deliberate and sustainable way. And we're really not making too many changes from what we've had in the past, but it's something for us to be cognizant about as we move forward. But it's one of the several reasons why we're not using debt to fund the regular capital program this year. And honestly, if we had used debt last year or the year before to fund our regular capital, we would not be in the position we are now to be able to do the middle school out of the levy. And finally, we have two more CIPs. So we have the sewer capital improvement plan. We're going to be using retained earnings. So retained earnings, each of the enterprise funds have their own free cash, basically. It's called retained earnings. The sewer has retained earnings of $5.9 million. And so the plan to pay for their $600,000 in projects using their retained earnings. And then the water capital improvement plan, they have retained earnings of $5.38 million, and they have $1 million in projects that they will be paying for out of their retained earnings. And this year we do not have any projects for the Stevens estate coming out of the capital improvement plan because we are doing them separately through the revolving account. And that's everything.
Wow.
Whew. It's been a busy couple of weeks, right? So,
It helps that you talk so fast.
I know. It's appreciated, isn't it?
Keep us going.
That's why I put a lot on the slides so that everybody can hear what I'm saying. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. I do want to thank Lynn and Bill and Superintendent Gilligan, they've been an amazing part of this, and Jim Mealy, who's on vacation, but has already checked in and gave me comments on slides earlier today from his vacation. So it's been pretty amazing partnership. We've been really lucky. So.
It seems like a very exciting future for the town.
It does.
And if it goes according to this plan, I think we're getting a lot for our money. But to your credit and the credit of past boards and so forth, we've been saving and we've been planning. And I think that helps a tremendous amount. I think it's very exciting.
I agree. It's a lot of opportunity, and it certainly has, there's not a lot of other communities that have capital stabilization accounts with actual balances in them. Many of them create a capital stabilization account. It sits with, $5 in it. So it's exciting to see that we've kind of committed to making this all work.
I think the big thing, and you alluded to it earlier, is keeping everybody on track. And of course, there's emergencies, things that come up that we would have to deal with. But by trying to keep everybody on plan to the best of our ability, except excluding emergencies that come forward that we have to deal with, is key.
Having a plan together here, really appreciate the work that went into it. I think, we all have to exhibit some patience. We all want these projects to be done as quickly as possible. But I think the way you've laid it out puts us in a good financial position moving forward to get all these projects done in a thoughtful and mindful way to the taxpayers. So thank you.
And I know this is a lot to process. It's been a lot for us to process, and we've been working on it for a few weeks, months, so I can imagine. And so any of us are happy to come back to any of your boards or committees and answer questions or discuss further or do further analysis if there's something you want analyzed. Because I do recognize that this is a huge leap that we're taking here, but an exciting one.
So regardless of what happens with MSBA this time around, is there any reason we wouldn't continue to apply to MSBA throughout this entire process every year for every project?
Yeah, we would do that.
Yeah.
We so, Superintendent Gilligan can speak to this, but we included all the projects this time too.
Yeah, absolutely. We've worked closely with them, and we submitted, again, all of the projects this year, and we would continue to do so. Oftentimes, it takes several years to get in the queue, but fingers crossed on the Kittredge. I feel like it was a really strong visit from the engineers, architects, the folks from the MSBA group, so.
And we have several years for them to, throw another plan our way.
And I'll just say somewhat quickly, I mean, I think one of the things with the Massachusetts School Building Association that they look for is the way that we maintain our buildings as well. So while Kittredge, for example, is definitely in need of additional space and amenities, in order to serve the needs of our students, the building itself is extremely well maintained. And that actually is very nice. And they made a number of comments on that as well. There are some structural things, of course, as well. So can I just take a couple of quick minutes? And then I'm sure some of the committee may have questions. So this is very good. This is very, thoughtful. I would first say, this is really the first time we're kind of seeing the plan of this. So thank you for your offer to come and meet with us. My guess is we might look to do that after the beginning of the new year. Will certainly be in our budget process, but I think that there'll be a good opportunity for that. The one, and I know that there's a financial plan and a need to kind of be responsible and diligent with all of this. The two things that really stick out to me is how far back Franklin and the ABECC are in this. And I was just kind of doing some relatively quick math. I have a high school senior right now who was born, 18 years or so ago. If he were to remain in North Andover and start his family as I started mine at 30, his kid would be one of the first that would actually conceivably be in that. So we're talking like that's how long out we are with this, that my 18-year-old would be a father at 35 and start to see his child go into a new gym at the ABECC. And I just think of where we are from a growth perspective, how that building will be in basically 20 years. So those are some thoughts that are already starting to percolate a little bit. But I know there's a lot for us to absorb with this, and I know that there's a absolute need to be fiscally responsible as well. But I do think we're going to have some interesting kind of diving in. I know we anticipated this would be a long process. I think you mentioned Facilities Master Plan 1 being roughly 10 years or so. This is absolutely, longer than that, but seeing those that far out is absolutely concerning.
One thing I could do that might help, and you probably remember we talked about this before. I talked about how I'd run this, 10 or 11 different ways to come up with a plan. Is I can show you, I can run again, what it would cost the average taxpayer if we did move Franklin up, right? And I think, for me, it has kind of this three priorities to the plan. One is getting the work done, right? That for me, that's a huge part of it. Two is maintaining that fiscal responsibility. But three is making it realistic and impossible to pass. Because once something fails at town meeting, it's really hard to bring it back, right? And so that's one of the things that I kind of kept in mind while I was creating this plan was, if we bring too many debt exclusions forward, right? If we don't use our new growth to pay for the capital, what is our chance of success? Is it as good? And looking back, and there's a chart on our website that talks about kind of our override win and losses over the years, right? And we really hadn't had any success since 2000 in an override. And so, I had that in mind when I was kind of doing this. Like, we all want this done as quickly as we possibly can. And, how do we get to yes?
Right, and I think the devil's always in the details, right? But like, as I start to look at Franklin and I see that the gym is, number 4, right? So putting that there, you know, I guess I'd want to know a little bit more detail in terms of what happens with the existing gym and what does that do in terms of classroom and availability. And then I think, just personally with the ABECC, you know, it's so close to the Fields project that's there, right? So there's definitely some space available, but also we've got the Atkinson School, looks like in 28. So is there a way that some of that helps with those students and the preschool? You know what I'm saying, you know, in terms of the additional gym and cafeteria, right? So how do we maybe do something there that kind of, I'm not saying puts a Band-Aid on it, but helps that not feel like it's going to be completed in 2039?
Right. And there could be projects that, like I said, there could be things that come on, new revenue. I mean, I don't think any of us ever thought we'd be sitting here for fiscal year 23 saying, hey, we're going to have $6 million in new growth this year, right?
Right.
You know, so you've got things in they haven't passed town meeting yet, but, you know, the Royal Crest project, something happening there. Those things are all going to bring in some fresh new revenue, new growth that we haven't seen before. And so that may allow us to move Franklin and ABECC up, right? And, you know, so obviously this could be seen by some as a worst case scenario. But I do think there could be room for movement based on some of the things we're seeing.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that they absolutely have to be moved up, but, you know, if there's a way that we can be
Understood.
very
Creative.
strategic about how we're using it, right? We're not talking here about completing something in 2040. That's just really long. And then a very small thing, slide 13, if you don't mind. I think what you mean on, I think it's the 4th building, bullet down, is the Franklin Gymnasium, not the auditorium?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to be sure.
That is what I mean. So yes, that's the gymnasium.
Okay, all right,
And the
perfect.
thought process there is that, you know, we do have that debt capacity reserve for a few years. So we'd be able to pay for that out of the budget, which is great. And that's one of the big needs that I heard coming out of the Franklin meetings.
Okay. All right. So I know I will welcome you to school committee.
Good. I'd be happy to come.
Thank you.
Can I just ask a question?
Of course.
Also on slide 13. Was the order of these projects done in combination of the need, the direness of the need or whatever, and the financial puzzle pieces? Or more of a, just here's financially how we can, given the size, financial size of the project,
All of the above.
here's how it fits.
All of the above.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know, I do. I completely understand. So it's basically all of the above. Like I said, you know, we started with the middle school because that seemed to be the biggest need.
Right, and that's clear. It was more the other ones.
Yeah,
Like, I
and
know
then-
everybody's been talking about the middle school forever, but it was kind of
Absolutely.
the other ones that I was wondering the
Yeah.
order.
For Kittredge, what really kind of pushed that up for me was twofold. One, the chance of having the MSBA funding, and two, that it's the most expensive project by far. And so if we waited, if you're thinking about 5% construction inflation, which is what we've been seeing on projects per year, which sounds crazy but is actually true, you know, if you waited and put Kittredge out until the year 5 or 6 or 7 points, it was just made the project so much more expensive. And so those are the reasons why we really pushed those up. For the fire station, for me, we're having equity issues there. We don't have appropriate accommodations for our female firefighters, so that's problematic. We went back and forth a lot on Franklin and Atkinson, kind of where that would fit in, and that's when we made the decision that the Franklin Auditorium would be really helpful, and then we could move Atkinson forward. I put the ABECC last because it was the newest building, and while I understand there is space needs there, seeing the deficiencies in these other buildings are much more alarming to me. You know, and this is a decision that obviously the Facilities Master Plan 2 Committee all talked about, that Jim and Superintendent Gilliam were involved in. So this is kind of us brainstorming all of the different schematics to get it to this point.
And I guess the follow-on to that was, so if we've deemed that to be the order, and as you said that, or if we do, and as you don't get too many at-bats with an override, if the town says no, then are we shifting things down in order to try and pay for one of the top priority projects with the with the levy, capacity. So, in other words,
If the town said no in
if the
28
town said no on Kittredge, but we still want to do that second, then we would push down the fire station in Atkinson, whatever, and try and like get more capacity to still do Kittredge, or would we say, we'll have to keep going to MSBA for Kittredge, and we'll still do fire station in year 3, or whatever. Maybe it's too much for right now, that's where I'm.
Yeah, my opinion is we'd revisit the plan.
Yeah.
Because I think Kittredge, is a priority right now. Superintendent Gillian, do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that there were 58 schools that had applied for the MSBA core program, and Kittredge has made it into the top 20 now at this point. So we'll find out in March, but we will apply for all of the projects each year moving forward, and we'll continue to work with MSBA closely.
It is. Chugging along.
So I like what you brought up here, Regina, and to what you were saying, Andrew, and I'd like to throw down a bit of a challenge here, because I think a lot of this actually comes down to perceived value from our community, which is how much do we value getting our schools ADA compliant? How much do we value having classrooms that aren't portables, that we're looking at literally saying, let's go back. 15 years ago, we were saying they were old and outdated. And we're talking about 10 years from now. So we're talking about portables that were 20-year lifespan max, being 50 years old. And I guess my question to the broader community is that acceptable for us to have this? And I understand it all comes down to dollars here. But if you're looking at to what value do you get for your money, as a taxpayer, as a parent in this community, it's a very elegant process you've laid out here, and it's one that works. And my challenge really to the community, and really I think has to be led by the school committee, because it's your constituents. First and foremost, you are most connected to the people who are impacted by this, which is, can we create that recognition of the need to go beyond what is just makes the numbers work? Because there are paths, as you have offered, there are risks with that. But we're at a seminal moment here. We really have the opportunity to do wide-scale and broad changes that really bring the rest of the community up to where literally our police and fire department are. If you look at the type of facilities that our police and fire have, and we decided it was important to invest in those, and we're going to continue, why aren't we doing the same thing for our schools? And why aren't we making the case out there that it's really important? Yes, it's going to cost us more money, but within what we're paying for our tax dollars, the value we're getting back, obviously most immediately for our children and what that means in terms of the classes, but also what it means for us as property owners in this community and what that says about us and the value of our properties, this is the time to do it. So I guess, again, I'm throwing out the challenges like, yeah, we've got a path that works here, or we could really dig in and make the case that this could be accelerated and should be accelerated because we've let it get to this point. But we have the resources and the opportunity and the expertise of a phenomenal town manager and a finance manager to get us there. This is our time. That's just how I see it.
So I think the good news is the first 5 years of the plan are fairly easy to implement, right? And so it's really that fiscal year 35, 36 thing that's kind of the linchpin that we're all looking at here. And so, the good news is that this plan, when we adopt it, when we finally have that final document, well, it's going to be the plan we adopt in whatever form it is. It's fluid, just like our forecasting exercises are, right? So there's lots of things that could happen. We could have a huge swell of support for Atkinson to be done earlier, right? There's just so many different things that could happen that I think that, we're in a really good place when it comes to figuring it out.
And I think the good news here, and I think people need to understand, this isn't set in stone. This can change, it will change likely, and we should all be aware of that. I don't want the general consensus being this is it. This is the way we're doing it. It's not necessarily that case. This is the best plan that we have right now, but things will come across and change, and if needed, adapt this plan to what happens.
Right, and I think it's important to remember that Facilities Master Plan 1, if, I wasn't here, but I read the document. It's a very different document than what actually happened, right? I mean, the senior center was supposed to be here, right? The Kittredge Gym wasn't even on the plan, right? So there's so many things that changed and were molded, and because, God forbid, like, we have a roof failure at Franklin, right? And we're already doing the whole roof, may as well move that project up, right? So there's a lot of things that happen that change the plan going forward. We're doing our best to guide you in what we think is the most fiscally responsible and manageable way. If you said to us today, we want you to do it all right now, right? We're all supportive. We're going to do all these projects in fiscal year 25. We would say, it's not feasible. We can't do it. We couldn't manage it, right? Where would the kids go to school? Like, it would be completely crazy. So, all we can do is bring forward a plan that we think works for the community. But we all know that through implementation, that often does change.
There may be a couple of quick questions, but I know Ms. Picard has a question remotely.
Thank you, Mr. McDevitt. First of all, I just really want to congratulate all of you folks who put this together. The town manager and her team. It's very creative, obviously. It builds on successes. I'm appreciative of what Chris said about community input. That's going to be very important, and the passion around that. And I echo what Mr. McDevitt said about looking at these projects that are further out. And when we're looking at Atkinson and the Youth Center in fiscal year 28, that's going to include an override. And those are two places in town that serve youth with great socioeconomic needs. So we need to be really looking out for the best interests of our students with the greatest socioeconomic needs. My question that I have right now, and I understand that this is going to be fluid and it's going to move around and it's going to need to respond to the passions and input of our community. My question that I have really has to do with not Facilities Master Plan 2, but your financial forecast.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, when you did your financial forecast, if you took into account the multi-year budget that the school administration presented some time ago. If we're going to be waiting many, many years for more space, we're still going to need EL teachers. We're still going to need, social workers and nurses and all the things that we identified, in addition to the teachers at the middle school. So I'm wondering, if you did take that multi-year budget. It was initially a 5-year budget, and then it was easier to talk about in terms of a multi-year budget.
So I don't want to take all Superintendent Gilligan's thunder. Fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 implement the first 2 years of the school's plan. So yes, for fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24, the 2 years that were not tied to building needs are implemented in this plan. The rest of the plan, the 5-year plan, or the rest of the plan, is contingent on buildings, right? So for the things that are further out, let's say, trying to think what the first one is. For instance, is a good for instance. The Atkinson, the new positions at Atkinson that are tied to the Atkinson building, as well as any operational Atkinson costs, are actually in fiscal year 29, because it would be built in fiscal year 28, right? The Franklin new positions are slated for fiscal year 36, because it would be built in fiscal year 35. For the ABECC, the operational increase, which is not people per se, but I believe is about $14,000 in kind of electricity and lights, that would be in fiscal year 37. So both the plan, the revenue projection plan that shows only the 5 years, as well as the capital improvement plan projecting out for the entire 18 years for the Facilities Master Plan 2, takes into account all of the school's requests during their 5-year plan.
So thank you. That's helpful. The truth is that the needs exist before the space exists. So if something's going to be waiting until the building is contingent, it seems to me then we might be looking at increases in class size so that we can create spaces for the other sorts of needs that students have. So that's going to be a very serious issue, I think, for the school committee to discuss as we go forward, and we'll be looking for guidance from obviously Dr. Gilligan and Dr. Mealy as we talk about those things.
So the chart I'm showing you right now is one of the scenarios that we ran. And so what you can see is over here in the last column, I have the operating project cost line, and each one of them has kind of a little thing to show how I'm paying for the things. So you can see that in fiscal year 25, we have the middle school project new growth coming on for operating. So the project was going to be designed in fiscal year 23. It's going to be constructed in fiscal year 24. And in fiscal year 25, I bring the operating costs on. That includes all the teachers that were requested for the addition to the middle school, as well as any cost associated with those teachers for benefits, et cetera. And then in there, I have Amazon New Growth paying for those. You can see that up here, Kittredge. So Kittredge is being designed in fiscal year 23, constructed in fiscal year 25, and then the operating will come on in fiscal year 26, and that's using Amazon New Growth. What I'm doing basically is every 2 years that the TIF comes on, right? So if you look at the TIF, and it's 80% exempted, 60% exempted, what we're getting basically is about $499,000 every 2 years. So I'm using that to basically build out what how I'm going to pay for the operating project costs with no overrides. So the way we've built this out right now will not require any operating overrides. If we move up any of these expenses to these more beginning years, it would require operational overrides. I just want to be clear on that.
I understand, and I'm sure you understand as well that we have kids today who need, additional EL work or whatever. And that's why those were put not in, a 20-year time frame, but really in a 5-year time frame, and then a multi-year time frame.
Sure.
So I'm sure we'll need to be dealing with that. And I also know that we have some of those ESSER funds, so some of those positions that would have been funded in the operating budget as ongoing positions became, 1-year needs to address the COVID response. So
No, I
we will
appreciate
have
that.
some very interesting conversations going forward. I thank you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that resonates for me and the way that I've seen success on these type of projects in the past is when you bring it forward in like a total package like this, right? Because it I think to the taxpayer, to town meeting, looks really thoughtful, right? They're telling us exactly, really transparent. They're telling us exactly what it's going to cost. They're showing us the space that they're building. They're showing us what they need to fill that space, and that's kind of where I'm coming at it from. But I appreciate your comments.
Well, and just one final comment. We're going to get started on this, right? I mean, and as soon as we get started and we have successes and the community sees successes and gets excited about those successes, that's when we're likely to have a good opportunity to use those passions and community input to shorten the length of this plan, seems to me.
Thank you. Just a couple, thank you. This is much more concrete that we've all been excited about, so thank you. I thought of one of the reasons why I think Kittredge being in the place where it is really critical, and that is that when we go to work on Atkinson, some of the students from Atkinson would be able to be over in the new Franklin building, because I'm assuming it's going to be bigger. The teacher could go over there so you can work on Atkinson without disrupting. Because even though we've always talked about neighborhood schools, we have 3 neighborhood schools right there pretty much. So I think that's another reason why that's in a good spot. And hopefully Atkinson would be the next one we get an MSBA approval for. And you did confirm just now what my other question was. I wanted to make absolutely sure, and it's clear that people who are watching understand that what you've planned out here also includes that when the building's ready, we have the money for the people to be inside. It's not like we have to suddenly figure that out, because that has not been done well in the past.
And
So that's,
and it accounts for inflation for those positions as well.
and
So-
that's spectacular. So that's really great. And then, I knew this was going to happen. I had a third thing, and I don't remember what it was anymore. Oh, yes, I do. From what Mr. Nobley said, I think the minute that people see FY 35 Franklin, that will be all they need to see, and that will change some energy, I think. So,
Be good.
thank you.
Thank you.
I was just curious, sorry. The years definitely struck me as well, of course. It's not something that you expect to see, even though you know it's like, you know, when you know that you're getting something and you want it right now, and then you realize you can't have it for a really long time. But, and Chris, I totally agree with what you're saying is this good enough for our community, right? And so you're challenging us to make that impact, or to make a change, or to use this time, because we've never been in a position like this before, which is amazing. And as the new person here, how do we do that? What is the process? Is this what we need to say, yes, this is what we do, and get the ball rolling, and then it changes from there? Do we have to say, no? I mean, I'm not, what's the process? How do we, because I don't disagree with you. I think that this is awesome. Now I've learned a lot, and I understand a lot more in how this all works. But this year, that's a tough one to swallow. That's hard to look at and say, you know, in fiscal year 35 Franklin, wow, that's a long time. That's your kid having kids. Holy moly, that's my kid having kids, right? The same thing. And that's hard. So how do we do this? How do we make it?
I'll give you one simple consideration. It's not the answer, but it feeds into it. How many people come to town meeting? 500, 1,000, right? How many parents have children in the schools? Anybody know? 3,000?
There's what, 4,000 people?
Right. So I would just make the simple case.
Absolutely.
Those are the only people you need to show up. Those are your people. I mean, you know, most directly, you're connected to them. I don't know how exactly you do that. I mean, Chris and I are former select board members, and we, you know, that memory is faded and old, and, you know, you're dealing with today.
Not so old.
Go, Chris, go.
It's a
He's speaking
campaign.
for himself.
It's a campaign. It's a campaign, Pam.
Yeah,
It is a
yeah,
campaign. It
right.
really is. And Chris is right on. The campaign is getting the people who are, this is truly impacting, you know, their kids, getting them to town meeting. It's huge. And so there's your efforts. Who can you reach out to? Who do you talk to? Every meeting, everybody talks about that this is important. This has to happen. You know, can we wait this long? I don't think so. After these 5 years are over, the first 5 years, things are going to be radically different than they are today. There's no doubt about that at all. So do not despair about 2036. I won't be here. But don't despair about that. But for right now, you've got 5 years of some pretty kick-ass projects that will radically change our school system for our kids. And that's the message. Every meeting, every chance you get is to say that. And how do we get that done? We show up at town meeting. You show up, and you show up, and all of us will be there. And if every parent who is concerned about what's going on with Franklin shows up at town meeting, they might actually get something that they need and they want, and the rest of the students want.
Well, and I think we've all seen exactly that, the efforts being made when we've either run for election or we've had huge issues, and we do all that work, and we still get the 3,000 people. And that's we're excited, 3,000, that is not okay. This is massive. This is our taxes. This is everything you're describing.
That's right.
And 3,000 people show up, that's pathetic. And while, yes, that is incumbent on us to get the parents out, this is our whole community, and the
That's it. You're-
people.
I am not disagreeing with you, not one bit, and that's why we're in a tri-board meeting like
That's
this.
right.
That's right.
It is-
Because,
it-
but also the people who haven't even gotten, Andrew's kid needs to come out and vote because it's his.
Yeah.
It's well, my daughter's 19, she can, but it's getting that generation as well to understand this is your future.
Yep.
You
Yep.
loved your Kittredge school. What do you see the new Kittredge school?
Yeah, well, and the reason we look towards the school committee, because obviously it's every meeting's topic.
Yes.
I mean, and so, yes, a lot of it comes from you, but it isn't just from you. And by the way, this is also a rare confluence of these tri-boards. You have 3 boards here.
Right.
All of them want, all 3 boards, let me say it again, all 3 boards want the schools to get this funding. They've needed it for decades. Way, way too long. Chris and I stands there, wake up Stan, tell him how it really was. But it's, yeah, but I mean, it's really true. We've done a lot, but nevertheless, we've always been shy on the spending for the schools. And their unique thing is the 3 boards here all are saying, nodding their heads, saying, yeah, man, we got to do it. And we have someone who's actually knitted together a plan.
Yes.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. It's something that we can work with. You know, take the 5 years, and then see what we can do with the remaining years.
Well, that is a really, really good point, because you do look at the first few, and it's pretty fabulous.
It's spectacular.
So,
It's
we can't get bogged down
huge.
in looking at 35, but that is the part that slaps you in the face.
Of
there's no
course,
question.
yes. Well,
But
there's
then-
always more to do, always
Yes.
more to do.
But there's a lot of killer stuff right up front, and it is, you know, as much as we've had a horrible couple of years here, this is a confluence of, there's a lot of great stuff happening.
Yeah.
Ms. Picard brought up the fact that we have the ESSER funds. That is making
Yep.
a big impact today, so we can plan toward all this.
There's
as
a
well.
lot of hope, here, and a lot of momentum, so we gotta hold on to that, harness it, and start campaigning.
And we education is
That's
key,
right.
I think, and I want this to be like dinner table discussion in
That's right.
people's houses. Like, the more we talk about it in the community, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. We build that consensus and hopefully move things a little closer in the timeline. But one thing I appreciate wholeheartedly is that we can see the impact on a taxpayer, and that you've worked to minimize that.
That is
That's
very smart.
incredibly important, you know, for obvious reasons. So that's much appreciated, but hopefully we'll see new growth that will maybe change the timeline, or, you know, but those first few years look pretty amazing.
I mean, we tell you that, you know, when we do the forecast, that it's really easy for us to forecast for 3 to 5 years, and we don't do it further out because it's impossible, right? So, you know, I think that looking at 35 and 36 in this vacuum of today is where we are, and it certainly can change. Laurie is the lead on the Facilities Master Plan 2 project on the town side, so she'll be working with, she's like, I am? So she'll be working with our contractor to finalize what this program will look like. And next steps for us will kind of be a new roadshow. It won't be as good, I think, as Jim Mealy's roadshow because he was amazing, but we'll probably do it on cam like we did the Amazon one, like kind of a, you know, live question. You can call in, you can email, you know, so we can get as many people as possible. And we'll present that final plan kind of to the public for input as well. But the good news is that we have the warrant opening soon enough, and we'll be able to start implementation, right? And so, you know, I think that's a lot to feel good about.
Yeah, and if I could just throw out there, so Facilities Master Plan 1, that was truly transformational for this town, right? And Andrew, you remember, both of us just got on these respective boards when that really kicked off. And, you know, you look back in the rearview mirror now, that was 9 years ago, and, you know, without COVID and other things, it might have been done quicker, but, you know, before, in the blink of an eye, that it's over, right? It's behind us. And I think that is something that we really need to leverage, because I think that built a lot of trust with the town that we can get these projects done, and we can get them done the way we say we're going to get them done. And if we follow the plan, we can deliver. And all of those projects are just shining examples of that delivery. And I think, you know, the projects here are really exciting. This is more than transformation. This is a generational opportunity, you know, and I think, you know, we'll have to work the plan. You're right, 36 looks far out there. My grandson will be already out of this. Okay, he may be able to take advantage of the first Franklin project, but other than that, he's going to be gone. But, you know, we want to see that happen, and we do want to see that pulled in. So, you know, we have to work with that. But I think this plan is something that we can bring to the town. We can show them that we've got good planning and we've got good, solid fiscal planning to get this done. And all it does is just builds more confidence in how we can deliver and how we can get projects completed. So I think it's a great plan, and I think, you know, maybe it's a little bit far out, but sometimes those years get here before you know it. But, you know, I agree. I would love to see it pulled in, and 36 is a long time from now, but we'll work on it.
I would just say very quickly, I mean, one, I'm appreciative of the plan. It's great to see it and kind of have all of those things. I really look forward to continued conversation on it as we look through and develop. The first couple of years are awesome and fantastic, but then I also still look at, Franklin being so far off, and, there's 5 years that a child will spend in there, and it's a long time before any kids are going to see some of the impact of that. So, that's Gillian.
Thank you, Chair McDevitt. I just wanted to say that it's really been tremendous working with the town manager. We have a tremendous partnership and collaboration. I have never been more excited about the future of our schools. This is transformational. It is going to impact for our town and our students for decades to come. Dr. Mealy got called the other day by a district to sit in on a construction meeting for some help, and they were talking about a building that was built in 1970 that they're trying to redo, and we think about Kittredge in 1949, and the other building's 60 years old. I mean, the ability to work together collaboratively to impact class size, provide appropriate support spaces for OT, PT, speech, etc., provide the appropriate specialist spaces, create areas for 21st century learning, modernize the systems and all the mechanical systems, come up to code with suppression and fire sprinklers, meet ADA requirements currently, and then also allow for the space to grow as a community and build that capacity is remarkable. And I'm confident that this is going to happen. And I just really want to say thank you to Melissa. I really appreciate the partnership, and I know that working together we can accomplish tremendous things.
We have a great team. We're very lucky, so.
Yes, Melissa, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
And Lynn, thank you for this.
Yes.
And what you did.
Yes, thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. So I just want to, again, say thank you to both the school committee and FinCom for coming tonight. This is what we've said, a transformative point in our town's history, and it's probably the largest financial undertaking that we have ever done. And it is going to take everybody here and everybody in the community to get it done, and we have such a plan. We have a plan ahead of us to work, and it's fluid. The projects are fluid. What we think we need today at Franklin, maybe when we go into design, may be different. But we have something to work towards, and we can work the plan, and we can hopefully get there. I think Dr. Mealy and Dr. Gilligan said at our meeting last time, like, this is the first time they really felt like this was going to happen. And I think that that's a credit to your working together and finding a way to make this work. When Selectman Nobley said, it's your contingency, it's all our contingency, but we just need, you tell us what to say, give us the elevator pitch, and we'll work for you. We all think that this is important. It's important for our children's future. It's important for our female firefighters to have equity in the facilities that they have. And that youth center that we have is so important to our children. And you see the middle schoolers go every day after school, and my 5th grader is going on Saturdays, and I mean, he thinks it's just like everything, right? Like, that he can go hang out with his friends. So that's so important to our community too. So you tell us the why smaller classrooms are better, why social emotional learning is important, why OTPT is important, and we'll get that message out, and we really need to get everybody out for town meeting. So again, thank you everybody for coming. Is there any other questions for Melissa? No? We have a couple of people in the audience. I'll even open it up to you guys if you have any public comment.
Yeah, if you had a microphone, we could do that.
We'll give you one. No? You want to? I knew you would, Stan.
Never offer it to Stan. I just wanted to say 2 things about this. First is, and I don't have the longevity that Ms. Medilli or our town finance director has at this, but this is, in my view, the most comprehensive planning document, budgeting and planning document I've seen since I've been paying attention. That's number 1. 2 is, I have to compliment Ms. Rodriguez, on the risk that you took to put this plan together. I mean, to say 36, you knew that was a risk. You knew what would happen. So the fact that you did it anyway, just for honesty's sake, is extremely impressive. Thank you.
Thank you.
The transparency is so important, and that's what will build trust in our community, and move us forward. So, I think that's all I had. So, if that's it, we can close out our meetings? Yeah?
So we'll just quickly, I'll see if there's a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
So Ms. Picard, followed by, second by Ms. Mably. We'll do a quick roll call. Ms. Picard?
Yes.
Ms. Petrowski? Yes. Ms. Vinci? Yes. Ms. Mably?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, 5 no. We did not discuss, just for the record.
Great, and at 8:31 PM, I would entertain a motion from the Finance Committee. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. We are adjourned.
Thank you. And our next select board meeting is January 10th, and I will entertain a motion for adjournment of our meeting. Oh, I have a motion? And a second, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You're like, I think we're adjourned.
Can't really tell us what.